Hey guys, EzraTime here and welcome back to another Ezra review, and today we are going to be reviewing this movie called V for Vendetta. Now I know this might be sound so sudden and out of nowhere, and I don't know if people still care about this movie, but I just recently got to watch this movie because of what happening in the UK and also in my own country, Indonesia. You know, a lot of like protests that was happening, and I thought it was like, yeah, people have been reminding me, and I guess like a lot of people as well, that yeah, man, V for Vendetta is gonna be much more significant right now, you know. And interestingly enough, I was actually planning to watch this movie when I watched The Matrix, you know, because this movie is written by the Wachowskis and also starring Hugo Weaving as V. And it was like way back in 2021, I think, but I never really get around to watch the movie until, you know, last week essentially. And yeah, I want to give you guys my review. And obviously, I'm not gonna be reciting every single plot point of the movie because it will be too long. I just want to give you guys, you know, my positive reviews and maybe some stuff that I might not like in this movie. And of course, like I'm gonna be maybe maybe like giving my own comparison to what happens to the real world right now, which is kind of like wow, you know. But yeah, no, let's start with the positive aspect about V for Vendetta here. First of all, I like actually the plot of this movie, you know, which is a dystopian thriller where this movie took place in the UK, and this is where the government is actually controlling the people. You know, there is a bunch of like censorship, and then there is some like all the news media was actually controlled by the government. You know, which is like a very well-known thing right now, where some of the news media is still like, you know, fake news and all that kind of stuff, you know, which is nothing new. But yeah, this movie is obviously ahead of its time, and we have the British government basically has organization called Secret Police, I think, and it was known as the Finger Man in this movie, and it's ruled by the far right ultra nationalist North Fire, I think that's what it was called, which is like a brutal fascist and totalitarian regime by it was led by High Chancellor Adam Sutler, and you kind of see him like in this big screen, and there is a bunch of people meeting there in the UK. And it's like, yeah, it was like a very relevant things right now, you know, considering what happens in the UK right now. And for the story itself, we're following Natalie Portman character, which is I think she was like a named Evie Hammond, which is like a British television network, and she works there, and she encountered this man named V, played by Hugo Weaving. Now, interestingly, I think the actor's name James Purevoy. I think he was originally portrayed the Countess, but I think after 6 weeks into filming, he decided to leave the project because I think some you know, creative differences, and then Hugo Weaving was recast as V. But I think some part was actually played by James Purevoy, you know, and I don't exactly know which part it is, but I gotta say, Hugo Weaving is absolutely fantastic in this movie. Like his voice as V is just so mesmerizing. It was so charismatic and charming. And I was like, yeah, I would follow this guy to fight against the government, you know. Like it was such an interesting character. And interestingly enough, the movie never actually revealed the real identity of V because he was known as like the Burning Man or whatever in the movie. And it's like the least backstory that we get for the characters, and I think that's intentional. And funnily enough, you know, I thought that V identity is gonna be like, oh yeah, if we remove the mask, then obviously Hugo Weaving will be under the mask, right? You know, that's what I thought in my mind. But as the movie keeps going, I was like, oh wait, that's not the case, you know, because I think Hugo Weaving character or face, I guess, does appear in the movie, but it was revealed to be just like a mask that was made by V, so that's not exactly his actual face, and his face is probably burning, you know, behind that mask. And I think that's interesting that they never actually reveal who this counter was, and it was more like his counter are more like a symbol of the freedom for the people, because the people of the UK obviously dislike the government and they are starting to believe in V's movement. And you know, I gotta say, I also love the action sequence in this movie. You know, they're not a lot because this movie is much more like dialogue heavy, and I don't mind them because they are great dialogue. You know, but I also like the action sequence, you know, in this movie. I think for the little time that we get, you know, where we see, you know, Hugo Weaving or V using his knife, you know, finding a bunch of cops, and it was like a really fun action sequence, you know. And then it was directed by, wasn't directed, but it was written by the Wachowskis from the Matrix trilogy. You know, yes, the Matrix trilogy. Don't the fourth one ever exists, okay? But this movie is directed by James Mateek, And interestingly enough, people there is some debate that it was like, oh, is it directed by James Matic or is it actually directed by the Wachowskis? But I don't know. Either way, I like the action sequence. Even though that we only get the small pieces of it, I think it's are well done. I especially love the final action sequence in the subway. I think the abandoned subway where V are fighting a bunch of cops, and then we get to see this cool movement, where he's taking out this cop using, like his knife, and then there's a bunch of slow motion happening, and it was absolutely fantastic. I love the action sequence a lot. And interestingly enough, we also see a huge character development for Evie, Natalie Portman's character, where back in the first act of the movie, she was just like an employee of the British television network, and that's where she met V again the second time, and that's where she decided to believe in V. But interestingly enough, V decided to put Evie into this huge, like, I guess you could say a trial or something like that, to basically redevelop her characters and her belief, where she basically are brave and not afraid of death again, or death anymore. And we get to see this heartbreaking backstory where we see like a backstory of like I think a lesbian couple that was arrested by the cops because they were lesbian and they were against that in the UK of this current government. And then they were, I think, I'm assuming that they're both were killed by this these cops, you could say that, and this basically pretty much motivated Evie to, like, basically no longer afraid of death, and basically not trying to give away V's location. But again, the movie has a twist that it was like, oh no, this whole thing was a trial and V was actually doing this to Evie, which I did not see that coming. So basically, the guy that Evie was talking to, like the guy in the shadow, was V all along, which is like, wow, okay, did not see that coming. But it was, like I say, planned by V the entire time, that to shape her own characters, and honestly, there is a bit of like a conflict here, in my opinion, where it's like, okay, I don't know why V does this, but at the same time, I guess the movie does explain why V, need to do this to Evie, but I feel like, wow, that was like a really, really just uh like a really hardcore trial that Evie was put into, that I thought it was like, man, I thought that was like, man, like, do you really need to put her into that situation? Which is like, damn, V, that was like kind of cruel, and he doesn't want to do this, but he kind of has to shape Evie's character to become much more brave, and basically supporting, I guess, V's movement here, that she doesn't give away V's location, which is like, okay. But when I first watched that, I was like, man, I don't think this is necessary. But I think over time, I was kind of like appreciating the scene a bit more, knowing that why V did this, and I think it was kind of necessary for Evie's character to develop even further, So at least I get the idea of it. But I think some people might find that to be, I don't know, I guess unnecessary. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, Maybe everybody loved this scene, And I still love it, Even though that I did not see the twist coming, and I think it has a clear purpose in the story itself, But yeah, I guess there is other characters as well where we see like a chief of police, I think, where we kind of follow him, and then he basically tried to arrest V, but I think over time his character kind of realized that, oh, wait a second, maybe V was right, maybe V is actually the gate to freedom here, and he sort of questioned his own government, and I think that's also like a really, really cool idea itself, where we see an authoritative figure that's starting to question their government, and then try to basically supporting V in the end, because V's ultimate plan in the end is to basically not only killing the chancellor and every single government branches out there. They like he is actually planning to basically blowing up like the government building. I think it was like the clock tower of London, whatever it was called, that was completely blown up on November 5th. And interestingly enough, I was actually kind of wondering right now, like, is something big is going to happen in November 5th, like actually happening in the UK right now? Because like people kind of using that as a joke, like, oh, November 5th, like be prepared for that, they're kind of like making jokes about that, because of V for Vendetta. But now it's like with the current situation of the UK, I'm just like, man, like is something big is going to happen in November 5th, because that will be wild, if some big protests actually happen against the government of the UK, because it does happen already because of like the Online Safety Act, which is sucks, and then also the immigration problem, I think, that was happening in the UK, and people are fed up, and the Prime Minister of the UK is just basically a fucking wanker, or at least it was referred to that by the UK citizen, which is like, wow, okay, that was kind of funny, okay, I admit. But yeah, I honestly kind of wonder if something big is going to happen in the UK in real life in November 5th. I'm just saying, man, if the situation in the real, UK right now, if the situation are actually getting worse, then I think something big might actually happen in November 5th. I'm not saying that a government building will be exploding or whatever, like, no, but I think there's going to be a big massive demonstration or protest that might happen later on, if things doesn't get better in the UK, because protesting are already happening right now in the UK. Also happening on my own country, Indonesia, and thankfully it stops, because I think the government are promising to, give the people what they want, because there's a huge corruption in Indonesia, and that's why the protests are happening way back in September. And I'm fully supporting the protests, obviously, because I think our government sucks. There's a lot of like huge corruption that was happening in the government, and people are fed up because these government people are getting paid all the time by our taxes, and then meanwhile the people are living in poverty, and obviously this anger has been building up in Indonesian. So that's why the protests are happening in Indonesia. So I guess there's that's the backstory for what happening in Indonesia. Maybe you already know that. Anyway, this suddenly became like a political channel for a while here, but I don't know. I think for a lot of like protesting that was happening, and this movie that I was watching at the right moment at the right time, it's like, yeah, I think this movie are really really relevant to this day. And it's like people are I know people are joking, but I feel like if things doesn't get better in the UK, then I think the UK might become like a dystopian country, to be honest. That might actually happen, and some people might actually argue that it's already happening. So yeah, I don't know. I guess for my review for Vendetta, the movie, I love it. I love Hugo Weaving. I love the performance. I love the action sequence, even though there is not many of them, but I do love it when it was there. I love like all the characters and the dialogue that was happening here. I love how brutal the government was in this movie. Where even if you are making fun of like the chancellor, like in a talk show, then they will come after you and you will be killed. And it was like, yeah, it's just absolutely horrible that was happening in this movie. And I think comparing this movie to the real life UK was like, man, it was like, is it insane? Is it really insane, that I feel like I'm watching this movie because of like what's happening in the UK? Yeah, it's it's really really wild, But either way, guys, that's my review for V for Vendetta. I love the movie, and also I guess some insight about like what happening in Indonesia, why the protests are happening, and also like I talk about a lot about the actual UK government and the protests what that was happening there. But so yeah, I fully support the protests, obviously, because of like what happened with the UK government, and I think they need to start caring for their own people, man. I know that this is like, I know my channel is not exactly political, but I think with what happening in my own country, I was like, yeah, I think the government needs to start caring for the people, And V actually has a great quote in this movie where he said that the people shouldn't be afraid of the government should be afraid of the people. And that's exactly what happened in the UK right now, which is like, again, really wild. And same thing what happening in my own country, that yes, because like you have to be afraid of the people, because like if you don't take care of the people, they will riot, they will protesting, they will show their their anger towards the government, and it's like, yeah, it's just gonna be really really wild. But either way, guys, enough talking, I guess, about the real political stuff, that some people might not like that I'm talking about real life stuff here, but I guess I have to apologize if anybody doesn't necessarily like that I'm starting to speaking about like real life politics in this video, because that's not my channel was. But I feel like with V for Vendetta and the comparison to like the actual real world, I feel like it's hard to ignore that, in my opinion, especially in the current time I was making this video. So that's what I feel like I need to talk about, because the comparison is right there, So I hope you guys understand. I hope you guys doesn't get upset with my opinion, that the government should be listening to the people. I agree with that 100%. But anyway, guys, let me know, guys, in the comment section below, what do you guys think about this movie right here? What is your favorite moment in the movie? What is your favorite action sequence in the movie? And I guess, what do you guys think about my opinion for the real life, political situation in the UK? So you guys can let me know your opinions about that in the comment section below. And if you guys enjoy this review, then make sure you guys snap and blow up the subscribe and like button, share the videos to show stuff, and stay tuned for more videos in the future. And again, I hope you guys enjoy this movie review, and I will see you guys in the next one then. Bye.